St. Croix Namekogan River system was one of 8 rivers covered under the National Scenic Rivers Act. From its wild and free nature to its abundant access points and primitive campsites, paddlers are sure to be impressed. Come along, I'll show you what we mean. On October 2, 1968, President Lyndon Johnson signed into law the National Scenic Rivers Act, designating this status to certain select rivers across the nation which possess outstanding scenic, recreational, geographical, historic, or other similar values. The law was implemented to preserve and protect the special attributes of these rivers, along with the narrow corridor of land bordering them. Archaeologists have confirmed that human occupation along the river began at least as early as 10,000 years ago. In more recent history, we know the area was occupied by Dakota and Ojibwa peoples. The Dakota, of course, called the St. Croix by a much different name, of which I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce. In essence, it means the rivers that unite. Namekogan is derived from the Ojibwa name, which sounds very similar to the present one, and means river at a place of abundant sturgeon. Both rivers humbly begin their lives in upland bogs and marshland in the far northwest corner of the state and gradually grow as they collect more and more water, draining out of the surrounding forest. One of the things that makes this area unique is that 3 distinct biological communities converge and mingle here: the northern coniferous forest, eastern deciduous forest, and the tall grass prairie from the south and west. By the time it reaches the Mississippi near St. Paul, Minnesota, the river has grown to a formidable size. The St. Croix provided an important trade route between Lake Superior and the upper Midwest by way of a relatively short portage between its headwaters and that of the north-flowing Morrall River. Historians most commonly credit the explorer Daniel Greysolon, Sieur de Lutte, for discovering the portage in 1680, but it's obvious that the indigenous people were using it long before his arrival. In fact, for thousands of years, the St. Croix and Namekogan were probably 2 of the most traveled rivers in Wisconsin. The riverway wasn't spared by the lumberman's axe during the logging boom of the 1800s. The rivers provided the crucial transportation link between the state's interior and the many sawmill towns that sprung up along the river much further downstream. The forest has since matured once again and continues to provide us with lumber and paper, but at a much more sustainable level. The logging and fur trade commerce that once took advantage of the river and its resources has now been largely replaced by an abundance of campgrounds, canoe rental shops, and outfitters, providing services to tourists and modern-day voyageurs. Although the few day trips we're about to show you are located on what's referred to as the Upper Riverway, the entire 154 miles of the St. Croix and the 98 miles of its largest tributary, the Namekogan, are open to all paddlers and canoe campers. It's our hope that you will have the opportunity to explore mile after mile of it. This short trip we want to show you first begins at the DNR landing just downstream of the dam in Hayward, and after paddling around 8 miles, ends at Stinnett Landing. The river between Hayward and Trego has a downhill drop of about 6 feet per mile. This produces many fun riffles and plenty of low-hazard Class 1 rapids. You'll also find it to be generally narrow in width, flowing through a combination of lowland forest comprised of a mixture of hardwood and coniferous trees and open marshlands teeming with wildlife. Here, the water levels are fairly consistent and normally always deep enough for enjoyable paddling. The day we paddled it, the water level gauge located 20 miles upstream at Leonard's read 165 cubic feet per second, slightly above average for fall. The river can be, and often is, paddled as far upstream as the dam that forms Namekogan Lake. However, the water level on this far upper reach is normally pretty low. It's best done during early spring or after a heavy rain. A point of interest along this stretch of the river is the historical Namekogan Croix portage. This connects the Namekogan St. Croix River system with the Chippewa River watershed, providing access to an alternative trade route to the Mississippi. There's no telling how many moccasin-clad travelers walk down this 2.5-mile path carrying birch bark canoes on their shoulders. This detour was particularly handy when warring relations existed between the Sioux, who claimed the lower St. Croix territory, and the Ojibwa tribes from the north and east. Since the wild and scenic river enactment, a vast majority of buildings, cabins, and footbridges have been removed from the riverway. In fact, the river has seen a remarkable return to a near-original state, making it an ideal river to catch a glimpse of northern Wisconsin, as it must have been like prior to modern-day development. Next, we're going to move about 50 miles downstream for an 8-mile trip beginning at Namekogan Trail Bridge Landing and ending at Riverside Landing on the St. Croix. You'll notice the river here is much wider. The water level is also much more consistent, making it easier to plan a trip any time during the paddling season. The 35 river miles between the town of Trago and Riverside Landing are favored for overnight camping trips, not just for the sheer beauty of the area, but for the abundant, exceptional campsites as well. The National Park Service maintains the riverside campsites, which all include a clearing for tents, a fire ring, and a rustic toilet. Picnic tables and water are located primarily at the group sites. The individual sites accommodate up to 3 tents, while the group sites hold up to 6. You'll know when you're getting closer to the St. Croix. The last mile or so, the river drops suddenly, producing many riffles and Class 1 rapids. These are probably the best rapids you'll find anywhere on the river. One of the many attractions to paddling this stretch is the opportunity to see the Namekogan join with the St. Croix. It is possible to paddle the St. Croix above the confluence, but like the upper Namekogan, it does get shallow during dry periods, too shallow for enjoyable paddling. Downstream from the previous section is another favorite among paddlers. What appeals most to paddlers on this 10-mile stretch is a slightly above average downhill drop of around 5 feet per mile. This offers up a good mixture of slow, scenic flat water along with intervals of fast, thrilling rapids. These rapids are normally shallow and forgiving at low to medium water levels, such as you see here. Like all waterways, caution must be used during periods of higher water levels. An easy way to find out about the current river conditions is to contact the Park Service's Marshland Visitor Center, located at the takeout point of this segment. Here, there's normally always enough water for a pleasant trip, due in part to the countless springs that ooze out of the surrounding hills, along with the added water from the Kettle and Snake Rivers entering from the Minnesota shoreline. Just like the rest of the river system, access points and streamside campsites here are outstanding and abundant. As you get closer to the takeout, watch for a narrow channel veering off to the left. Hidden behind a large island, you'll find these picturesque sandrock cliffs. A short walk up will take you to an awesome campsite with a view. Your trip doesn't have to end here. The next 30 miles down to the town of St. Croix Falls is equally nice for paddling. The falls that give the town its name have long been buried behind a huge hydroelectric dam. Below is Interstate Park, a crown jewel of Wisconsin state parks. Here, you'll witness the effect of the meltwater the receding glaciers had on the bedrock. Well, now do you see why we give the St. Croix Riverway such high praise? As paddlers, we feel grateful to those that had the vision and foresight to ensure that this river was set aside from development and exploitation so that we and future generations can experience it as it should be, wild and free. See you on the next river.